Now, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Brianna Jarnigan, and I work in the Office for Diversity, Literacy, and Outreach Services here at the American Library Association. And just want to say thank you to everyone who is attending our Spectrum sponsored webinar called Networking, What's in It for Me? And this webinar is being presented by two 2014 Spectrum scholars, Jerrod and Bradley Kuykendall. I'm just going to go through some housekeeping really fast and then I'll turn it over to them. So this webinar is being recorded and a recording will be sent out to all registrants after the session, and it will also be posted on our e-learning site under the ODLOS offerings. If you are using your phone to call in for audio, we do have that number and passcode in the notes section on the upper right hand corner, and just be sure to mute yourself if you do that, just so we don't have any like background noise coming through. If you have any tech issues throughout the session, feel free to send me a message. I'm ODLO staff, so you can just message me directly and I'll try to help you out with that. Um, and finally, we just ask that you kind of collect your questions and you can put them in the chat for everyone to see. At the end of the session, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes or so of a Q&A that we'll moderate, and Jerrod and Bradley will answer those as they came in. All right, so I think that's it for me. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenters. Thanks.
And thank you, Brianna, and thank everyone that was able to attend today's session. Bradley and I are very excited about being here, being able to talk to you about networking. What's in it for me? It was just yesterday that we were at a lot of the different sessions associated with being a scholar as well, and so it's really nice to kind of be here to share some of the experiences that we've had with you. We wanted to make sure that we thanked Brianna and the ALA for allowing us to present to everyone. So thank you very much. And with that, we'll go ahead and just get started. And so once again, you can see, Bradley and I and kind of our current roles now and what we've done since we graduated from the University of Illinois. Um, and so to give you a quick agenda of what we'll be touching on today, as we get started, what we'll do is we'll have a quick poll to kind of get a pulse for the participants that are in the room. We'll go through what we call story time to kind of give you a framework for what inspired us to start having these type of conversations and presentations. We'll go over the four W's: the what, the who, the when, the why, and the when of networking. And then we'll talk about some of the nitty gritty and getting into some of the key networking topics. And so we'll go ahead and jump into the poll. And so, as Brianna talked about in housekeeping, as you'll see at the top of your screen, there is a little guy up there that you can press for us to be able to for you to raise your hand and us to be able to see, how many of you are doing some of these things. So, question number one: how many of you network? Could you, with a show of hands, so we could see on the screen how many of you are doing that? Nice. So, just a few of you.
Okay. Um, I'm now jumping in. My name is Bradley Kuykendall, and it's a pleasure to be here. So the next question we have for you guys is: how many of you all use social media as a networking tool? Okay, that's the majority of everyone. How many of you all use anything besides Facebook or LinkedIn? And if you have, if you don't mind, could you go ahead and type it into the chat?
And then, so for those of you that are here, how many of you are using networking to look for jobs or new opportunities? I'd love to see with a show of hands how many people are using networking for that purpose. Awesome. I see a few of you are doing that as well. All right, so thank everyone for their participation in the poll. We'll go ahead and get started now that we have a better understanding of kind of where everybody's at, and how we can, really refine our presentation to make sure that it's specific to you. So, now what we'll do is we'll jump into what we call story time, and this is for you to understand kind of where we're coming from and why we wanted to make sure that we were sharing this information. And so, I'll go ahead and get started. So, I personally was talking to one of my mentees the other day, and she'll soon be graduating from grad school at the U of I. And she was starting to tell me that she's getting a ton of advice on how to go about approaching her career and some of the next steps that she should definitely look at taking. One of which that she's hearing all the time is that she should be networking. And then as we had much more candid conversation, she went on to tell me that she doesn't really know what networking is, specifically when it comes to the differences between professional networking and building a larger group friends. And so she went on to also tell me that she also felt that it was really disingenuous and uncomfortable, which is comments that I had heard, from a number of people and my fiance as well. And so I wanted to see, Bradley, if you had any conversations like that with maybe some mentees or any people that come across your reference desk.
Yeah. So at my institution, it's an open enrollment institution, and I currently have about 40 to 50 student workers. And the majority of the student workers that I have, this is their first time ever having a job. And majority of them actually got the job through either me coming and asking them, "Hey, how do you like the library? What are you currently doing?" And as I interview them and I get them on board, they actually never had a networking or somebody such as myself come and talk to them. So every day, especially at the beginning of the semester here at my institution, I'm networking with students and talking to them a little bit more about just talking with people and getting them started with networking.
Very cool. And so as I continue the conversation with my mentee, to answer her questions, I told her that the differences when it comes to different types of networking, professional and social, can be, aligned to the differences between Facebook and LinkedIn, at least from my perspective. And so I went in and I was able to say that, Facebook, at least from my experience, is very organic. And what I mean by that is that many times a person's profile will grow simply because someone might like a picture or a post or, was at a party with you in some way like that. I mean, in many cases, at least from my experience, there were a lot of people on Facebook that I didn't know at all and became my friends. And that's going to be in comparison to LinkedIn, where I found it to be very, very intentional. And so most of the people that I've gotten a chance to connect with on LinkedIn, I've met, whether it be at a networking event or being in a different session. And so it makes so it's much more intentional. The only variance is that LinkedIn will also have people that may want to know someone that you know and will connect with you so that they are closer to that one or two connection range. And then I also told her that, when you think about it being disgusting, I know that I had to learn about that myself and kind of being disingenuous. And so I did some research to really understand like how to best approach that. And I told her that, there are ways to make it more authentic. And so there are like a few things that you can do. One of which is to be able to just focus on the learning, and you're able to, really focus on learning about a person. And so if someone that's, interested, like most people are, in someone else, they're able to focus on what they can learn about that person, which aligns to the next thing that they can do, which is really identify a lot of the commonalities that people have. And so something like that allows people to really understand that at the end of the day, we're all similar in some way. And so it's not quite as disingenuous as, just kind of reaching out to get something from someone. And then ultimately you're able to offer something. And so I let her know that no matter, how little you feel like you can offer, it's really might be something that's a game changer for someone. And so you don't really want to discount anything that you can offer someone else. And then if those don't get you all the way there, think about the higher purpose that could align to the way that you think about making it more genuine. And so when you think about being a part of a larger organization and how the things that you're doing from a networking standpoint could better your organization, or if you're doing it for a job, could put you in a position to better support your family. And so, that said, I was wondering, Bradley, like when you get those type of questions from the students, especially first generation students, how do you kind of tell them they should go about being better at networking?
So, what I generally try to tell people to do is first and foremost develop a sense of who you are. Um, what is it that you're trying to accomplish, and following up with people, because not every opportunity in regards to networking can lead to a particular job, but what it can do is build you a network of people where you can recommend someone, or someone can recommend you for a different job. Not everyone or every person that you talk to might not necessarily be fruitful in regards to job or some information that you may be seeking. So with that being said, I kind of want to go to the next slide.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and move on, and jump into the what of networking. And so, this will really allow us to start talking about the specifics. And so, when you think about what networking is, it is explained to us as effectively growing your brand and having that name recognition. And so, what this is going to be is, the goal should be to have people speak on your behalf in a positive manner, even in your absence. And so one of the things that I've found, especially as I've moved from different organizations to other organizations, is that one consistent theme I've heard from managers is that you need people that are going to be your brand ambassadors, even if they don't know, if you've never worked directly for them, but they've been around you as you've worked. Because ultimately, what's going to happen is there are going to be people that are sitting in a room looking at your name, or like your name in comparison to someone else's name, and there's going to be somebody that's lobbying in your favor, and that's because you were able to network them and they know about what you do and what your brand is. And so when they hear your name or see your name, they're able to speak about you, and that gives you maybe a better probability or a greater chance of getting that role. So that said, I think I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide.
So who should be something you think about in regards to your brand most importantly, but who is also about who you're trying to network. For me, some of the people that I first began networking with are my friends, such as Jerrod, um, family members. One of the very first jobs I ever had was through my actual grandfather, and it was cutting grass, believe it or not, for a church and for a daycare. Without him, that wouldn't have been my first job. Professors, alumni at your other institutions, as well as supervisors. I think something that's kind of unique for me. This is probably the longest job that I've had. I've generally bounced around a lot. Been at this job that I currently have for 3 years, and in that time, this is probably the most I've ever spoken with my advisor in regards to networking, both professionally and personally, in regards to different things in my career I should be looking at, professional groups, and other things that could probably potentially help me be a better employee here, and if I was to move to be a better employee somewhere else. So, who is a very important thing in regards to who you're out and networking to. Gerard, do you have anything that you would like to add on to
Yeah,
who?
when I think about who I'm net or who should be networking, I'm always a big advocate of anyone that may be more of an introvert, finding a way to find their comfort zone, right? And so that they should be able to put themselves out there and network. Because unfortunately, if you don't do it, there are very few scenarios where people are going to do it on your behalf. And so that means that you should be networking. Everybody on this call should definitely be continuing to build their brand with everyone that they meet, even if it's not something that is a huge impact for someone. Them knowing who you are is a great thing to be doing.
And one more thing that I would like to add, a statistic from a couple of years ago from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that 70% of jobs are found through networking. So most networking essentially leads to jobs. Oh, if we can go to the
Absolutely.
next slide.
And so, I think that's a great segue into the why. One of the things that we love to talk about is, contrary to popular belief, there are many times where people at the end of the day are going to be making these decisions. In many cases, like Bradley just talked about from the statistics that he shared, many of these decisions that are going to be made at the end of the day are going to be made by people. And so I know that we really get caught up on building the best resumes and making sure that it meets all the qualifications or criteria that are set by different algorithms that are found on different HR tools for hiring. But at the end of the day, at the end of that tool, at the end of that process, there's a person that's going to be making a decision. And so, you want to make sure that you're building those relationships. Bradley and I have conversations all the time about, the fact that we hear so many people say that, oh, let's hire, him because we know Sarah and she went to OSU as well. And so, we know that because she's a great worker, that he probably is a great worker as well. And so it's one of those things that you got to make sure that you're doing. And so networking is really necessary so people know about your successes. And so, there are ways that you can go about sharing with people your successes, how they can understand your skills, your education, and your goals. One of the things that we hear is this idea of a blurb that you're able to share in regular common conversation. And so the scenario is if you had someone that was maybe working as a project manager, they might be able to say something like, like I'm super excited about my role. I love being a project manager. I just got my first budget this year and I just brought my first project to close on time and under budget. And I love doing this because I'm studying to get my PMP certification so that I can continue to build my skills and education because ultimately one day I want to run my own project management office or PMO. And so you can see that ultimately this touches on a lot of the bullets that we show here. And then at the end of the day, people trust people that they know or people that are in their circle. We hear like terms like the circle of influence and things along those lines. And so you really want to try and network as much as you can, and this kind of outlines why it's necessary. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why we network, Bradley.
So I have a prime example of why you would like to network. Last year, I attended a conference because I do a dual role at my institution where I manage access services. I no longer do access services, but nonetheless, during a conference, we had a breakout session, and I'm kind of big into sports, and so I happened to be sitting down and watching the TV and an update on some basketball, and a lady who I didn't know from left or right, and she didn't have her badge on, was engaged in conversations about basketball too. One thing led to another. Come to find out, she was a newly hired employee at the University of Mizzou in Jefferson City, where Lincoln University is. It's only 30 minutes away. We got to talking about what each other does, and now we're doing a partnership where I'm going to be sending some undergrad students to Mizzou to do some internships or practicums at their information science program. And none of that would have happened unless I just began talking. And this kind of segues to, if you can go to the next slide for me, Jerrod, of when. There's always an opportunity to network. At conferences, for me, such as the one that I just spoke about, Mobius, I began networking literally during a break that led into a collaboration with another institution that seems to be fruitful. So let's talk about like when are some good places that you probably wouldn't even think about in networking. For me, sometimes even though I work in a library, in my spare time I go to the public library. I've had some networking situations happen at a public library, just on some recreational type reading, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Of course, at work, home, online when I'm, browsing through Facebook and other social media outlets. And there's been times when working out has been fruitful in a networking opportunity. But with that being said, I would like to pass the mic back to Jerrod. Do you have any situations of, a win a networking opportunity provided itself and how that came out for
Absolutely.
you?
And so, one of the things that I think that as uh, me and Bradley talk, I'm really, really outgoing and love to talk to people. And so, like, I find myself networking with people in some places that many people don't really think of. So, one of the places that I network a lot because I travel for work is on trains and planes. And so, trains and planes in general are really kind of awkward scenarios because you're seated next to someone and in relatively close quarters. And so I take that opportunity to learn about the people. And every once in a while, I'll run across someone that really is able to share something that I really enjoy learning about. One of the best examples about that is the one time I was taking a flight out of Champaign Urbana to a conference, and I was actually able to talk to one of the professors that worked in our business college, and he was able to share with me some of his thoughts on the way to think about the job searching process and negotiating process. And now I have a relationship with him that has given me both a new relationship and now information that I can share with others. And so it was one of those one-off scenarios that you really never really know how it'll play out, and you never really know who someone is until you get a chance to talk to them. And so, that said, we'll go ahead and move forward and talk about some of the key networking topics. And we'll go ahead and get started with barriers. And I think, Bradley, you can go ahead and tell us your thoughts on this.
So barriers is a big deal in any process or any part of networking. For me, the biggest two things that you want to be cautious of is alcohol and your environment. Um, so I don't know how many of you. I would like to take a poll just for a moment. Have any one of you all been to ALA? C1. Okay, most of you guys. Okay, cool. So I just want to briefly just be personal. ALA when I first went in 2010 was just like overwhelming. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of things, and there's a lot of people moving. But something else about ALA is there are a lot of parties and different functions that vendors put on. Um, so where I'm trying to go with this is most of these parties and what these vendors have going on, they generally have alcohol, and you'll be surprised. Well, I'm not anymore. I was like, librarians really know how to have a good time, um, and sometimes that good time can be a little bit too much. If you're like at an event, especially at ALA, you never know who you may bump into. And if you're at an event and you become too intoxicated, one, that can mess up your brand. It'll make you look bad, and it can make your employer, whomever you're with, look bad. And number two, that environment with a lot of drinking going on, you probably won't be able to have a fruitful as a networking conversation as what you would like. So you need to be very conscientious of your environment and alcohol when you're in networking mode. Jerrod, do you happen to have any experiences or want to elaborate on some of the barrier
Yeah,
issues?
one of the things that I find to be really interesting is many times when it comes to environments, many people will find themselves in an environment that they really feel like they're unqualified to be here. I know that I can speak to that personally, as there is a conversation that I had one time with one of my peers, and it was this idea of imposter syndrome. And so it's this idea that you never really feel like you're supposed to be there. And so when you feel that way, many environments where there are just tons of successful people are there, you feel like you shouldn't be there, and so that becomes a personal barrier that people can put up. And so the way that I was able to find a way to overcome that was some of the things we talked about earlier, which was being able to figure out what value I could add. And so I knew that like I had a real interest in technology, and so I love to be able to share that with others. If nothing else, just a new technology that maybe a friend or something that I'm just very interested in that I've just been learning a lot about. I can add that information to the conversation, which makes me feel a little bit more confident as I'm having those types of conversations. And you think about technology in general, many people aren't quite as technology savvy, and so it becomes a situation where you're finding the technology that works best for you, specifically, makes the whole process a whole lot easier. We'll talk about those different technologies specifically in the digital realm a little bit later, but yeah, those are some of the areas that I found to be barriers that I was able to either address or overcome as I'm networking.
All right, next slide, please. So goal setting. Once again, most of the time, a networking opportunity can happen anywhere, anytime, and it can be with anyone. But generally speaking, if you're going to, like, let's say a conference such as ALA, or if you're on social media, you kind of want to have a goal set up. So I have some bullets that I've wrote down that I would like to just share with you guys in goal setting. So one of the first things I think you should do is develop a quick intro slash elevator speech about yourself. I'll be talking about elevator speeches and an example of one later in our presentation, but essentially you want to mark down like what makes you you and different from you. You also want to have some business cards, so that somebody, if you're talking with someone and they leave, they can refer back to that card to look at something. Another thing you want to make sure you have in regards to goal setting is a resume, and also to not carry around resumes. Are people familiar or aware that you can develop a QR code that you can put on your business card that actually has your resume attached to it? And I get somebody to raise their hand if they're aware of that. Okay. All right, but that's one of the things you can start doing. And I think the next important thing, besides you developing your intro slash elevator speech, are identifying some questions. One thing that I do know is a lot of people like talking about themselves, and they don't even know it. I don't think I like talking about myself, but sometimes when students ask me questions, I start to realize, like, hey, they're asking me about myself and so on and so forth. So here are about three examples of questions that you kind of want to have in your repertoire when you're developing your goal setting in regards to where you're trying to go and things of that nature. So one of them is, and I can expand upon it a little bit later. How did you get involved in this career? Um, Second one is, what is your job like? And another one is, what leads to success in your field? So these are some of the things that you want to develop in your goal setting. If you're going to a conference, if you're going to an event, a meeting that you want to have with you at all times. Jerrod, would you like to care to elaborate on with a story of you setting up some goals in regards to your networking opportunities and
Absolutely.
engagements?
And so one of the things that I really try and focus on as I continue to go to different conferences, and if I end up at maybe an area specific conference, is who exactly I want to talk to. And so if you were interested in moving into sales, there are sales specific conferences. And so I know that when I think about how I approach those conferences, what I'll do is I'll say, I recently, took a role. And so I know what my shortcomings are. And so I know that I need to learn how to better manage people. I know that I need to learn how to build a network that'll allow me to build out a more comprehensive strategy. And so from there, after I align the goals that I want for making my job better, I look into understanding who are the people that are doing that. And so I look for people that may be attending a conference that may be more seasoned in that space. And so I make it a focus to make sure that I'm learning about someone who might be maybe a director of sales or a vice president of sales, but has been doing it for maybe 5 to 7 years, and I can understand how they've been successful. And so, it aligns directly with what the slide says. It allows me to know, why I'm even attending that conference, which is, to meet someone that has been in management to help me become a better manager. And then the fact that I want to actually leave with the contact information of one of those managers so that I can have more in-depth conversation with them, and maybe even turn them into a mentor of mine. And so during these conversations, it makes it to where like I have to think about things like etiquette, right? And so it's a great segue into understanding a bunch of little things that I think we don't talk about quite enough. And it's little things like being on time. There are things like it's nice to be late into certain things, or like being on time or late to look cool. But when you think about things like meetings or phone calls or even attending a networking event, I can't tell you how many times I hear people or talk to my friends that host networking events that really get a chance to spend a lot of time with the first person that was present at the networking event. And that many times can lead to a really strong relationship and maybe lead to them building out who they are going to be able to network with as well, just by simply showing up on time. People set time and they're really appreciative of when you are cognizant of their time and how you're using it and not wasting it. And then also, when you think about etiquette in regards to actually showing up to an event, you want to make sure that you're able to, eat the food that is not going to make you really, really messy, right? And so I can't tell you how many times me and Bradley have been in a situation where we've seen people eating messy nachos, and then they've got like a drink that has a bunch of dew on the side. And now when someone at a networking event comes up to shake their hand, they've got two hands that are full of both messy and kind of awkward items. And so you have to just think about that. I think Bradley talked about it as well, but one key point of etiquette is when you're at these events, you can't get drunk. Even if there's alcohol and it's free, you have to understand that that's not the same way that it was when you were maybe in a college party or something like that, where you took it as just a open ticket to get as drunk as you could as quick as possible, because then at the end of the day, that's bad for, like Bradley said, your brand, and maybe lessening and maybe lower your chances of being able to get a job. And then the last thing when I think about etiquette is something that I find is really simple but really powerful, and that's just treating everybody the same. And so when you think about the way that you're shaking people's hands, I'm not saying that you should try and break someone's hand, but I do believe that if you give firm grips, I think that you should give a firm grip to both men and women the same. And so I was wondering, Bradley, what are your thoughts on some of the things that you found are good etiquette as you network in different spaces?
Um, so everything that you just touched upon is great. I have a philosophy that I live by: do unto others as you want them to do unto you, and that generally tends to get you far. Something else in etiquette that I think is important too is just making sure you're very respectful. Once again, unfortunately, not every person you talk to will be fruitful. Not every opportunity that you see and that you try to accomplish is not going to be there. But you just got to make sure that you're respectful and that you carry yourself as an adult and just with respect. So next slide. Elevator pitch. So let's talk about it. An elevator pitch should be a 30-second commercial, so you will, of who you are and what you would like to be doing professionally or trying to accomplish something personally. You should have a path of your experience, like a timeline, so you will, of like what you've done and how did you get to where you are and why did you do them. Here's an example of an elevator speech. Hi, I'm Bradley. I'm the reference instruction librarian at Lincoln University with a background in business. Currently in the process of making reference videos to help patrons do better research. I'm interested in meeting people who have videos or make films. I'm curious on how to make better videos at my institution. That is a brief 15-second elevator speech of who I am, what I'm doing, and how I'm trying to do it. And it is also explaining what I'm trying to gain out of the conversation. Um, that's essentially a elevator pitch. Jerrod, would you care to elaborate or talk about any of your elevator pitches, or what do you do to
Yeah,
develop
and
yours?
I definitely think about it in terms of bullet points, because we have varying times that we're on elevators, and so when I think about the key topics that I want to touch is basically my name. I want to talk about the fact that my name is Jerrod Moore. What I do, as director of sales for the Northeast. And where my interests lie, I'm interested in driving sales for test preparation, inside of my organization, and meeting people that are passionate about that as well along the way. And so, as we have different amounts of time, sometimes I expound a little bit more on, the path to my role, or, the way that the software might actually work. But ultimately, it's just like three very concise topics that I try and touch on anytime that I have a conversation in the manner of an elevator pitch, and it focuses on what I'm doing professionally, more so than what I'm doing personally. All right. So when we think about a good conversation starters, you generally want to ask some open-ended questions. What do you do, right? And so it's this idea of extending, the conversation that you may have had on the elevator if you guys got off on the same floor or you were going to the same event, and that leads to allowing people to do what they like to do naturally, which is talk about themselves. I don't think that you'll find very many people that aren't at least willing to tell you what the day in their life looks like, just because people, may have some thoughts that they might have wanted to share and they don't have anyone to really talk to. And so that's a great way to start a conversation. As you learn about what they do, you can start digging a little deeper to understand things like, how long you've been with an organization. And so as you're having that conversation, you're very much in a scenario where you're able to gain more questions that you're able to learn about, what they do, how long they've been with an organization. And then you're able to ask questions that may be a little bit more personal, but then able to do things like ask questions like what you do for fun. And so, the thing that I love to point out as you talk about conversation starters is this idea that we learned about, is that people build relationships through shared experience. And so it's awkward for both you and the person that you're having that conversation with, and you're sharing that experience. And so even if the initial conversation is awkward, as it goes on, it may get a whole lot less awkward. And then as time goes on, then it's just a really natural conversation. And so, Bradley, I was wondering, like, what are some of the things you do as you try and start conversations with people?
I generally take the same approach as you. Like I said, piggybacking off of an experience I shared with you guys earlier about an Access Services conference, a conversation literally started by talking about basketball. I'm a big time football guy. I'm an NFL Dallas Cowboys fan. I play a couple of fantasy different leagues. I'm real active in the community. I do voter registration on campus, and I'm an election poll judge where I'm at. So I generally have like unique conversations about life, about what's going on besides work and things of that nature, and then I segue into okay, so here's what I do for a living, or here's what I'm trying to accomplish, and then once we've established some similarities or some bonds, that's when some great conversations generally tend to happen. So that's pretty much. I have nothing to add on to what you had just said. That is well spoken on, and just personally, just being more outgoing and things of that nature is it's very helpful for you in regards to conversation
Awesome.
starters.
And I think when we talk about conversation starters, you want to figure out how to close on those conversations, which I think Bradley will share a little bit more with us about.
So I think the most unique, it's almost like an airplane. The most dangerous time for an airplane is when it's taking off, and the most dangerous part of an airplane is when it's landing. So you want to have a good conversation starter slash elevator pitch, and you want to have a good closing and slash follow up. So it's actually pretty standard to say it's a pleasure talking to you. let's set up another time for us to meet. When you end conversation, it's in your best interest to say when you're going to follow up, how, and what it is that you're seeking. If you just end a conversation and you just go off into the abyss, um, they're probably talking to other people, doing day to day activities, and they might forget about you. But if you leave a lasting impression and you state, hey, I will be emailing you tomorrow, look forward to talking to you a little bit more on a collaboration, a job opportunity, or an informational interview. I would like to know a little bit more about what you do at your job or currently doing in the profession. I'm kind of interested in it, and that is kind of like the standard good thing to do. Gerard, do you have any examples of how you close or follow up to
Yeah,
conversations?
I usually love to thank people for their time. I'm really big on, like saying things that that allow us to both move on. And, like one of my favorite phrases when attending networking events is that, I know that we both came here to network with as many people as possible, or at least meet a few people, and so I don't want to monopolize your time. That said, I'd love to get your card or, your contact information to follow up and continue this conversation at a later date. But if I don't, then if I don't want to follow up the conversation, I just let it end with thanking them for the time and then allowing us to step back. I also am really cognizant of, like, using some of the things that I was taught about, which is, like, as I'm looking to end the conversation, I start taking a step back if it's in person, or putting my hand out to shake their hand to end the conversation as well. So those are kind of some of the things that I use to close and follow up. And so, when we think about, closing and follow up, we talked a lot about, being able to follow up within a certain period of time. And Bradley gave a bunch of really great tips. But one of the things that I thought was fascinating is Bradley and I were collaborating to talk about the way that we use digital. We talked about some of the key ways that we network with LinkedIn, email, and then other social media, being, some of those key players in a way that we network. And so I'm a big LinkedIn fan. And so one of the things that we talk about is that LinkedIn is much more dynamic than I ever knew it was when I first got started, because you're able to and should actually connect with more people than just the general people you would think about connecting. So it's more than just connecting with, like, your peers or those in the same profession. You want to connect with, like, managers that you may have had even as, even in your first career, and, or first job, and professors. You would never believe, like, how many different people professors are connected with. And if you build a good rapport with your professors, they can then connect you with other people. And then those advocates, one of the things that I'm learning as I continue to move around in the workspace, is that, there are a lot of people that were supporters of me moving on to different roles and trying new things that I didn't know, that I didn't know were supporters. And so I make sure that I connect with them via LinkedIn and email. One story that I think is absolutely fascinating is that a guy that I met at a previous organization told me that he has made a number of relationships that have led to different roles in consulting, because what he does is that he actually goes to events, and then, with the badge that he sees, he looks at the registration list, and then looks for people that may work at an organization that he's interested in working at. And so instead of shooting to just try and connect on LinkedIn with the hiring manager or the executive in charge of some organization, he reaches out to someone that may just work for that organization that could allow him to now have a one-off connection, to be able to connect them with now that CIO or CFO or some executive that maybe actually has some hiring power. And I thought that was fascinating because I never even thought about using LinkedIn in that manner, until he talked to me about it. Email is pretty standard, but even when you think about, sending a cold email, you don't want to send, or at least I try not to send a cold email to the leader of an organization like a CEO or CFO or something like that. More somebody that might actually have time to actually read emails from just a complete stranger, instead of making sure that their own organization is thriving and successful. And I found it fascinating to hear like the way that Bradley used other social media to really accomplish some of the same tasks. And so, Bradley, I'd love to hear the way you use some of the other social medias to be successful networking.
So, unfortunately, I don't make a lot of money where I'm at currently. Lincoln University is a small HBCU in little old Jefferson City, Missouri. So I don't actually have the funding to attend a lot of conferences like I did when I was going through grad school and things of that nature. So most of my networking happens actually through Facebook. And what I mean by Facebook is that, you know, how earlier about the who that I was talking about, like family, friends, professors, things of that nature, alumni. So I'm a heavy Facebook user in regards to just seeing like what's going on out there in the world and various parts of the country. But I'm also engaged in a lot of different Facebook groups. The UIUC MIS group, LIS Job Hunters. Do you need a library job? Circulating ideas. RUSA. So I do a lot of my networking and trying to find professional development and things of that nature through Facebook. And sometimes, just with Facebook, when I become friends with certain people and we're working on different ideas, when I see that they're probably close to my area, I'll be like, hey, I'm right here in Jefferson City. I'm 30 minutes away. I possibly can drive after work to Mizzou, and we can have a drink or we can get some food to catch up and things of that nature. Um, Case in example, Jerrod, he was originally tasked to do this presentation, but we reached out through Facebook first. So a lot of my great encounters have happened digitally. But I have to forewarn everyone though that if you are like me, you have to be very not conservative, but you got to stay on top of your Facebook in regards to what kind of things you're doing, what kind of pictures you have, and so on and so forth. I mean, it is your Facebook and it's your profile, your brand. So just if you're out there trying to network professionally and come about jobs, you just want to make sure you have your Facebook up and going. But for me and the opportunities that is done, Facebook is probably my best uh, social media outlet that I use to network for professional development and to keep abreast on the profession.
Awesome. And so, we really had a great time talking about this particular topic because it really allowed us to see the differences in the way that we go about, building our brand and networking with people in today's digital age. That said, we'll move into, the final tips that we had. We won't spend too much time talking about the different tips. We wanted to make sure that we put them up here, and I know this recording will be shared. But it was just different things around the barriers, goal setting, etiquette, elevator pitch, conversation starters, closing, follow up, and digital. Just making sure that you have like little quick tips to make sure that you're able to be successful in all the areas that we talked about today. That said, I think that with our last 10 minutes, we're going to open the floor up for questions, and we're looking forward to being able to answer them to the best of our ability.
All right, thank you so much. So if anyone has any questions, you go ahead and put them in the chat box so that everyone can see, and then we'll just start to go through as they come in. Okay, so Daisy is asking, what are your thoughts on Twitter and having that as part of your brand?
So, Bradley, did you want to go first?
I'm sure I could go first. I'm not really, unfortunately, I'm really not into Twitter anymore. And the reason being is because of all the politics and stuff that's been going on lately, and it's just kind of been getting out of hand for me. But Twitter, I think you just need to hold any social media very conservatively, especially what's going on in the world. But it's a great tool for networking. It's real quick and easy to use. I actually really like Twitter. I think you should use that as a tool to reach out and seek people. So I usually use Twitter when I was using it to just follow people that in the industry that interest me, and it just kept me abreast of what's going on.
Yeah,
Gerard?
and I'm about the same way. I'm not big on posting a whole lot on Twitter, but what I do like to do is I love to keep up with what's going on in the industry. And every once in a while I'll post something or retweet something that I find interesting or in support of a friend that may be campaigning. And so I think that personally I'm a little more active on Twitter during the campaign season. But and as Bradley said, in today's current political climate, I try and sway a little bit more away from Twitter, and really try and draw the line between my professional and personal life when it comes to like LinkedIn and then other social media. But that said, I'm encouraged by my team to get more active on Twitter because it is the way that people are consuming information, which I find absolutely fascinating. So I think that ultimately, it is completely up to you. It can be a great part of your brand. You just have to be cognizant of what you want to be seen on Twitter. Great question, though. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Daisy, for your question. And then I know Leslie's typing. I'll give her and anyone else with questions a couple more minutes to get those in there. Okay, so Leslie is asking, how much time do you spend with each person at networking events, noting that you do not want to monopolize their time?
It really depends. There's not necessarily a quote unquote time because conversations and relationships are unique within themselves. So I like quality over quantity. If you go to a networking event and you just happen to talk with one person the whole entire time, and you're having some quality information going on, just stick with it. But if you do your goal setting and your plan, and it requires for you to talk to at least five people or so, depending upon where you're at and what the networking is at, keep it to a minimum about 5 to 10 minutes, and make sure that you have some great conversation starters and that you end the conversation well. And like with the business cards and following up, like I said earlier in the presentation, like a plane, the most dangerous time is when you're taking off and landing. I think the most important part of any networking opportunity is the conversation starter, the elevator pitch, and closing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I couldn't have
Right.
said it much better. I mean, when I think about the amount of time that I spend uh, with any specific person, it varies. Some people it is literally like a 2 or 3 minute conversation, and it helps me meet my goal of being able to like learn more about them. What they do. What they're interested, and like how we can connect or collaborate. And then other cases like there's it's such rich conversation that the conversation will go on for 10 or 20 minutes. I guess when I start to pull away is when I realize that I've been talking to someone for an hour. And that's because I love to just ramble on about all things. And so that's when I try not to monopolize their time. And so I guess the rule of thumb is that you'll start to feel when those initial conversations are coming to a close and the topics that you're discussing become more and more spread out, or the answers become more and more or more and more short. And so that's kind of the way that I view it. But ultimately, there's no like hard fast rule for how long we talk to people, unless it's like what Bradley said, 2 or 3 minutes that you set aside because you wanted to talk to 10 people in a 30-minute session. So, but great question for sure.
All right, thank you. And it looks like Janae is typing. Let's see.
Just something off topic. I have a job opening here at the institution that I'm currently working at. It's called the Reference Manager Librarian. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me after this. We have just a couple of people that have applied. It just opened, but it's more kind of sort of like a technical services librarian position. If anyone is interested, but nonetheless, I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, and then
All right,
Janae,
sounds good. All right,
and then
sounds
Janae, I
good.
see your question. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to learn about it, and depending on timing and where it's at, I have a little bit more flexibility in my schedule right now, and so I can't speak for Bradley, but I would definitely try and make it if at all possible. But the slides, we would definitely be willing to share them as well. So whatever works best for you, I think we could do.
What was the question?
So she said. This was an excellent presentation at ALPL. We have an apprenticeship program for college freshmen and sophomores interested in librarianship. And then she said, I would love for you to be a guest speaker at our wrap up program, or she would just use the slides. Um, and so I said, I couldn't speak for you, but I would definitely be open to it if time is available.
Oh, I'd be more than happy to do that.
All right, and then it looks like Elisa said, thanks for the info. That was great, and it goes hand in hand with what I'm learning in classes now. And Nia added, thanks for your presentation. I'm mid-career, but lately some of my mentees have been asking for advice about networking, so you've given me some tips, and I can share your slides. So, all right, and does anyone have any final questions that they'd like to ask of Jerrod and Bradley?
Awesome. Well, if there were no more questions,
All right,
sorry.
so, oh, go ahead.
All right. If there were no more questions, we just wanted to make sure that we're always building our network as well, and sticking to what we just talked about. And so please connect with us. We've got our contact information here, and I think that Brianna will be sharing information with you all as well after this presentation.
Yeah, I'll be emailing out a recording, and I will also include the contact info that you see on here. I'll include that in the email as well. And then in general, we also just want to let you know of um, resources that are open to the scholar community as well as community resources that are open to all. So we have two links on here for Spectrum sponsored community resources. You can go to the first link. You'll see a community directory. You'll see information about our social media presence and everything. And you'll see there are certain items that are just for scholars, and then there are certain that are open to anyone who's interested. So be sure to check those out. And you can also view our past and refer to future webinars at the second link there as well. So thank you again to Jerrod and Bradley for their presentation today, and thank you to everyone who made time to
Thanks,
attend.
you all.
All right,
Yeah.
See you later.
Uh,
thanks, bye.